family and your circle of concerns are all safe and healthy. And for now, that you'll also stay that way. During this afternoon's presentation, we will share web links for each of the authors for additional information and of course for book sales. Please enter your questions in the chat and we will get as many of them answered as we can after the presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce Maddie Margarita of Lit Up, Orange County. Maddie is a writer and host of Lit Up, OC, a popular writers salon in Tustin, California, on which her podcast, Author on the Air Network, is featured. She is on the board of Sisters in Crime and the Southern California Writers Association. So for now, we invite you to get comfy and enjoy this afternoon's presentation with Maddie Margarita, and she will introduce the authors.
Hi, everybody. First off, thank you, Carol. On behalf of Lit Up OC and our panel today, this afternoon, thank you for inviting us to the special virtual world of the Museo. So that's where I'm picturing us right now in your beautiful museum in the heart of Anaheim. So thank you again. And I can't think of a better place to spend it than at the Museo with our panel today. We have Caitlin Rother, who I believe will be joining us momentarily. Liska Jacobs. Wave, Liska.
Hi.
And Lance Charnes. Wave, there we go. Okay, so let's start off today with a round of brief self-introductions, kind of who you are and what genre you write in. Liska, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. So I'm Liska Jacobs. My writing can be found in the Rumpus, Literary Hub, The Millions, LA Review of Books, Alta Magazine, among others. I'm the author of 2 books, Catalina, which came out in 2017. Oh, I'll show you the cover. This is what it looks like. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a beautiful cover. And that is about, I'll do the elevator pitch, or should I do that now?
You could do that now.
Okay. Let me see if I can remember. The elevator pitch for that is a mid-30s woman loses her job at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And she comes back to Los Angeles where she regroups with a group of friends that include her ex-husband. And they all go on a sailing trip to Catalina. And there's lots of drugs and sex and alcohol and everything spins out of control. So it's a fun one.
What could possibly go wrong?
Well, exactly. Which brings me to my newest book, The Worst Kind of Want. Here's the cover, which is also very pretty. Yeah. These were both came out by MCD FSG. The hardcover came out in November before we all were on lockdown. So I was lucky enough to have a launch and do a quick little tour up the Pacific Northwest. And then everything came to a halt. But I'm very excited about the paperback. It's coming out this November. And this is about a woman in her 40s who is struggling with the grief of the death of her sister. She goes to Rome to reconnect with her niece. And she, while there, is seduced or seduces a 17-year-old boy. So again, what else could go wrong? That's sort of my brand in a nutshell, I think.
All right, well, I think we have a good idea of that, Liska. Okay, great. And you left out that you write literary fiction.
I do write, oh yes, I write literary fiction, yes, yes.
So I think that's such an interesting combination, but we'll talk about that moving on. I see Caitlin joined us, yay. Okay, Caitlin, you're muted. So you have to unmute that little microphone on the bottom.
Unmuted.
There you are.
Yay.
There you are.
Wow.
Welcome.
We're going to give you a minute to catch your breath, and we're going to go to Lance. Lance,
okay.
Do you want to talk a little bit about yourself and your books?
Okay. I write thrillers and more recently crime/caper type books. I have 2 standalone thrillers. The first one is called Doha 12. It's an international espionage thriller based on a true story. The other one is a near future thriller called South, which is set in 2032. It has no epidemics in it. However, there's a whole bunch of other things that are torn from today's headlines in it. My most recent project is the DeWitt Agency Files series. The first one is The Collection, which is like this. The other two, Stealing Ghosts, which is the second one. And the newest one, which came out in November, is Chasing Clay. It centers around Matt Friedrich, who is a disgraced LA gallery, art gallery worker, and spent some time in the all-inclusive federally run resort in Pensacola, Florida, with a bunch of CEOs who had bad lawyers. He learned the arts market through one of the crookedest galleries in Los Angeles, so he knows all kinds of bad things to do with art. He's been hired by a private agency, the DeWitt Agency, that fills needs for people who are rich enough to hire them to fill their needs, and he gets the projects that have to do with crimes against art. And so each of the three books has been a different aspect of crimes against art. The latest one about smuggling antiquities from Southeast Asia and the drug trade.
Well, that's great. And I know, Liska, in your background, you know nothing about anything like that. But we'll talk about that moving forward. Okay. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi.
Hi. You want to,
I made it.
not that anybody doesn't know who you are, but do you want to talk a little bit about
Sure.
who you are and your books?
Sure. I have this one, which is Dead Reckoning. This is actually an updated edition of a book that's come out some time ago, but it had a lot of new information. It's about the case in Orange County that some of you guys might have heard of, the Skylar DeLeon case, where the transgender killer at the time was still presenting as a man, tied Tom and Jackie Hawks to their anchor of their boat right off the coast of Newport. And they were basically drowned alive by this person who is now on death row in and out of the psych unit at San Quentin, and it has transitioned to a woman using hormones. So it's been very topical. Was on 2020 recently. And I've got a few others I'm just going to show quickly. This one is called Then No One Can Have Her. It's also another true crime book out of Prescott, Arizona, which I actually got because somebody who had read Dead Reckoning, because Tom and Jackie were from Prescott, I got that story about Steve DeMacher being convicted of killing his estranged and then divorced wife of only 35 days, was beaten to death with a golf club. I also do other kinds of stuff. I have this one, which is a short memoir based on my marriage. And it actually, I'm going to be developing it some more with the book I'm currently writing about the Rebecca Zahow case, which is the Coronado Mansion death. And that was where the girlfriend of a very rich man who was a pharmaceutical magnate, Jonah Shacknai, she was found naked, bound, gagged by Jonah's brother. And the authorities said it was a suicide, and there are many people who think it's a murder. So I'm exploring both of those things, but I'm also bringing in my own experience because my husband committed suicide by hanging. And so I have a unique perspective to bring to that. So I do memoir, I have a crime novel as well, but mostly I write about narrative nonfiction crime.
And yeah, you modestly neglected to mention that you were nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for journalism. But aside from that, moving right along. So I think hopefully everybody who's listening and or watching, this is Maddie Margarita, by the way, if you are just listening, has some idea of the quality of the panel that we have here today. So each of them writes in very, very different genres. I had a question, and I guess we could start with Liska. In your genre, did you choose your genre or did it choose you?
You know, I think that's an interesting question. I feel like I write what I want to write, and then the genre sort of falls into place afterwards. Like the publisher sort of puts it where it's going to go. I think we've talked before about how I sometimes get pushed into literary noir, which I never thought would have been my sort of niche, but it's certainly not something that I wrote towards. I thought, I mean, I just sort of write about what it is that interests me, which is sort of the modern woman, whether or not she can be selfish and vulnerable at the same time. I love sort of exploring the sort of unlikable female character, also sort of pushing against that. See if we can understand her more, see what makes her tick. That's sort of what interests me. So I think the genre part comes later.
Okay, so would you say both Elsa and
Scylla.
Scylla are unlikable?
I would say I think a lot of people dislike them for sure, which is why I wrote them in first person, so that you would get a sort of idea of what their motivations are and what complicates. When we use the term unlikable woman, I think unlikable character, it tends to apply more to women. You don't really get that term applied to male characters. I was talking to someone the other day. We realized basically every character on Seinfeld is an unlikable guy, but we don't really call them that. So I thought, you know, this is something that we use really to describe women, and what is that? And it tends to be women who don't do what they're supposed to be doing. They tend to have a lot of responsibilities and they neglect them, and that makes them unlikable. Someone that is counting on them to be there for them, and if they're not doing that, then there's repercussions.
So, okay, thank you for that answer. So when you wrote that, did you anticipate that there might be people who were uncomfortable reading the book? Because it's very painful in places. Both the books are painful, and I think uncomfortable might be
challenging.
Challenging, right? Mm-hmm. Was that intended, or was that an unintended result?
Absolutely. I one of the things I work hard at is to try to make the writing very breezy and digestible, like very easily digestible, so that it feels like it should be like a puff cotton candy piece, something that's easy to enjoy, but the content itself is forcing you to think about what is going on the page. And then I also really like to have them take place somewhere beautiful, so that I can have that contrast between like the inner person and the outer person also. So I did know that there would be sort of a challenging aspect of it, and not everybody would. I mean, nobody likes to have a mirror put up in front of society and force us to look at ourselves in a deeper, more complex way, especially women who misbehave. Even in 2020, it's so interesting to me that we still have these sort of rules. I think we've talked before about, I'm a huge Jean Rhys fan, and my first book, Catalina, was sort of a riff on her first book, which was Good Morning Midnight, where a character misbehaves. And I thought, well, I can write a book like that, but it can have a happy ending, because women can mess up and still find their way and be forgiven. And through writing that book, I realized, oh my God, it's been 100 years since her book came out and nothing's really changed. I still need to have repercussions for her. She still has to deal with the fallout, because there is fallout for women who, take their hand off the wheel.
Did you realize that every time you say misbehave, you smile?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's why I put glasses on, so you don't see the glimmer in my eye.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, both Elsa and Scylla are compelling characters, and they're really interesting in the genre. So let's move on to Lance. Lance, you write mystery thriller genre.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about your characters. I guess you could talk about either Matt or Carson, or we could talk about the characters in Doha 12, some of my favorite, Jake and Miriam. What do you think genre readers look for in their characters to make them interesting and relatable?
I guess it depends on the reader, because an awful lot of thrillers these days have the, male god warrior as the lead, and he's the SEAL or the ex-SEAL and knows how to do everything and can fight and climb and drive anything that he gets behind and so forth, which I don't find very relatable. And one of the reasons that I populate my books with relatively normal people, although some of them are worse behaved than normal, is that I like the kinds of mysteries and thrillers where at least one of the lead characters is somebody that I could look at as someone that I wouldn't mind either spending some time with or be. And I'm never going to be the god warrior, and it's a little late for that in this day and age. So for Doha 12, Jake and Miriam were reasonably normal people who had reasonably normal jobs. Jake had a family. Miriam was a paralegal. And they just happened to get in the way of larger forces that decided that they needed to go away. And luckily their paths had been such that even though they're not unusual for their upbringing, they still ended up with some skills that were useful for them to make it through this dire threat to their lives. In South, again, my protagonists were all very normal people. Even the antagonists were relatively normal people, just doing what they do. And the lead had a full nuclear family, wife, children, mom and dad, living in the house with them, and friends. It's just something else that you don't see a lot in thrillers. And the protagonist is usually the brooding loner who's an alcoholic or a drug addict, or an ex-alcoholic or an ex-drug addict, and can't form adult relationships, and every single one of his multiple wives and girlfriends has been killed by bad guys, and so on and so forth. And it's like, really? This guy should be in therapy. He shouldn't be carrying large weapons around. So I wanted Lucho to be a normal person, and he'd been to Afghanistan. He'd learned some things there that he could use for the side gig that he had. But he was just a guy.
Lance, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is really unique about all your books is that the women tend to be written as much stronger than the men. So not only are they the men not necessarily the god warriors, but the women 9 times out of 10 are the strong kind of kick-ass warrior types that show up in whatever garb you put them in, paralegal or FBI agent or whoever, Carson, the muscle.
Right.
The muscle.
Right.
But so just quickly, why did you choose that? Or why do you think that happens in your books?
Well, first of all, I didn't want the female characters to be just decoration or just be a playmate for the lead men. I wanted them to be full partners. I didn't want them to be the typical kind of female character who shows up in a lot of mysteries or thrillers who needs to be rescued all the time. I like the idea that they could do the rescuing. They can either rescue themselves or they could get the guy out of trouble. Matt, in the DeWitt series, is violence averse. He doesn't like guns. He doesn't like knives. He talks his way out of trouble. But there are coming to be times where bad things need to happen, and so he needed somebody around who could exercise that kind of decision-making and that skill set, and it was Carson, who's this disgraced Toronto cop, who he butts heads with at first and then comes to an understanding with in the second book. But I didn't want her to be the Amazon warrior goddess either. I mean, she's got her problems, and she's working through them, but she happens to have been in a situation where she has put together the skill set to knock heads if it needs to happen.
Right.
I wasn't looking to come up with Matt's mouse or Matt's hawk, because I don't find either of those characters to be terribly interesting. I wanted something a little different for that.
Okay. That's interesting. So you have strong women and
Yep.
In here, and then moving on to Caitlin, you know, you write both Lance and Liska write fiction, but you write a lot of narrative nonfiction and a lot of true crime.
Right.
So, and in your intro, you talked the stories that you brought up could be fiction, should be fiction, because even if you tried to write them as fiction, people would say that would never happen.
Right.
So, how do you approach character in your books? Because they're true and they're living, breathing people in some cases that are alive at the time that you're writing these books.
Right. So basically, what I try to do is there's always a killer and there's always victims. There are attorneys, there are police officers, there are family members on both sides. And what I'm trying to do is basically give you a 365-degree, three-dimensional view of the human condition. So nobody is all bad and nobody is all good. And I write a lot in the gray. So what that means is I don't write black and white killers who are just terrible people. I'm going to show you, I'm going to humanize them. And they are real people. These are not fictional characters. And I think in fiction, crime killers, they're villains and they're exaggerated. And I don't need to exaggerate anybody. I tell the truth. And in fact, I go the other way and I show you the good side of them too, because sometimes that's even more horrifying to find out that real people are not what they seem, and that you can be taken in by these people because they are generally con men and con women, and they can seem entirely harmless. So Skylar DeLeon, for example, before I actually met Skylar, I had not ever heard his voice. And at the time he was still presenting as a man. And yet I saw him on TV before I actually met with him in the jail. And his voice was like this, like a girl. And I thought, wow. And what came out in these witness interviews, which is partly what I used for my research, with the police. I watched it on video and had audio. And then I went and interviewed Skylar myself 4 times in jail before the sentencing hearing. I also went back in 2015 and talked with her when she was now a woman, tried to cut off her penis in jail, never was successful, but now there is a whole process for prisoners in California to apply for gender reassignment surgery on the taxpayer's dime. And so it became a whole topical thing. But my point is, Skylar is a pretty complicated person. And I was the only person on 2020 when I was interviewed who called Skylar a she. Everybody else wants to still call Skylar a man because that's what Skylar was born as. And I'm not taking anybody's sides. I am just basically following journalistic practices, and Skylar has legally become a woman in court. So I just follow. So I have to not only think about characters as, are these people interesting to read about? I need to tell the truth. And because I can get sued. These are real people. They have rights. And so, I just tell the truth about what made them the way they are. And that's my goal in researching people, is to show every part of them. And I talk to their family members. I talk to people who like them and don't like them, say good things and bad things. So what you get is a real live person.
So we talked about people who are, that's a lot of responsibility to tell these stories.
Yeah.
We talk about the fact that some of the people that you write about are alive and living, but there are also some that are celebrity, Twisted Triangle. I don't know if you know, it's one of my favorite books.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Is Well, you want to talk a little bit about that really quickly? Because it's such an interesting book, and it
Yeah,
is.
it's unfortunate it's completely out of print and no one can buy it. So
I bought it.
I don't want to spend
know
too
how
much
I
time
got
on it because that was be a tease. But but yeah, Margot and Jean Bennett were two FBI agents who were married to each other. And Margot had had a lesbian affair in college, but had decided that this was a circumstantial thing, and she really, fell in love with this man, Jean Bennett. They were both in the FBI. He was a wonder boy as an undercover agent, and orchestrated these enormously successful undercover operations where all these people were arrested and put in prison. And so, but he went bad. And so things went bad in their relationship, and she had an affair with Patricia Cornwell, the famous crime novelist. And this is all a true story. So I, though, have to be careful because Patricia Cornwell is an extremely wealthy, litigious woman with a lot of money. We both had a book signing scheduled one day at Warwick's in La Jolla, and she managed to get my book signing canceled because she didn't want to be in the store the same day as me, even though we were hours and hours apart. So anyway, these are the things, and I can also get attacked by people and have been attacked personally and professionally, my integrity and everything else because of some of the books that I write, because people believe, that their stories are their stories to tell when in fact they're not. And I try to be respectful and sensitive of everybody involved. But I can get attacked by all kinds of people for writing what I write. So I have to put a lot of thought into it. So that number one, I don't get sued. Number two, so that I'm sensitive to people, because you're right, it is a very big responsibility to tell the truth, and because not everybody has the same truth. We all have our own truth, and I just try to find one that is the one that makes the most sense and that is logical and credible.
Okay, great. Okay, all of your books are page turners, but in such different ways. So I guess we go to Liska. It makes it easier if I call on you, but if you want to interject or talk to each other, that's fine. But because you don't, you talked about your books being literary noir, which I didn't even know there was literary noir.
Neither did I. I didn't know that either.
So, but there is an element of, or are elements of suspense through your book. There aren't necessarily murders and car chases and things like that happening. How do you manage to write in such a way that readers are turning the page because they desperately want to see what happens?
Well, I think it has to do with why I was smiling when I was saying misbehave, because part of that is what happens when a woman misbehaves is everyone knows, the reader included, that there's going to be consequences, right? So if I'm telling a story in first person, present tense, and you're along on the ride, and the moment, in Scylla's case, she does tactically commit a crime by having an affair with a 17-year-old boy. And so nothing good can happen from that. And having mounting tension through every single page, also part of it is the writing style. I try to keep it, like I said, very breezy so that it feels like you're falling constantly. And of course, there's nowhere to go except down after in both books, really. I think Catalina starts out with Elsa ordering a pitcher of Bloody Marys and going through a variety of pills she stole from her mother. So you already know, there's tension on the page from the minute the book opens, and that there's going to have to be a release of that tension at some point. I think that's really important too, to keep sort of the suspense factor, which is funny because I didn't realize there was sort of a literary noir. And a lot of times The Worst Kind of Want was on a couple different crime reads lists, which I thought was interesting, because it can be read in sort of a suspenseful way. The moment I have death as sort of a background, underlining, simmering sort of thing from the moment the book opens too, she's taking care of her ailing mother. And Rome, when she goes to Rome and Italy, it's a place that is just saturated with history and death there too. So it's kind of always in the background that something bad is going to happen. when they get to Puglia, which is in Italy, and the half of the book takes place there, there's just cliffs everywhere, and people are, driving fast and cliff diving, and so there's always sort of this underlying danger of the human body, how fragile, delicate, sexual it is, but also how, I guess, at risk it is of getting hurt.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned risk, and I was thinking controversial as I was listening to you speak, and that element of risk, like Caitlin was talking about, how risky it is for her to write what she writes.
Yes.
But in a different way, it's very risky for you to write, particularly the worst kind of want. And we talk a little bit about your inspiration for.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to respond to Caitlin too about getting into trouble with your characters, because yes, my books are fiction, but as a writer, I'm sure this is true for Lance too. I draw heavily on my own experiences. When I was writing the book, my grandfather was dying, and so I was watching how that sort of reshuffles the deck in my family dynamics. And so there was a fallout between my mother and her sister, and I was already writing a book about fallout between a mother and a sister. So when this book came out, they really thought it was about them. And it was probably the most uncomfortable Thanksgiving I've ever had, because they all were like, first of all, like you mind a lot of seeing my grandfather pass away, because I was dealing with my own grief, but also, where did you come up with this idea of a mid-40s woman having a sexual reawakening with a 17-year-old?
Were they looking at each other?
No, my grandmother was, I think she called Scylla a slut as she passed me mashed potatoes. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm going to have to explain the entire book to you guys. So the sort of idea behind the book was, I'm on the other side of 35 is what I'll say. And I was starting to sort of think about what it means to be an aunt rather than a mother. I don't have children, and how women who are not on the sidelines, I guess, of society, how they can be taken advantage of and ignored. And that sort of started the idea of it. I also was really interested in Lolita. The very first, at the beginning of the book, is I wanted to sort of flip the switch and write a Lolita version, where the Donato is the name of the 17-year-old boy in this book. So originally the book was going to just be called Donato. But I quickly realized that to have an adult woman prey upon a 17-year-old, she has to have greater motivation, besides just being a pervert, I guess. So it became more about grief and her dealing with age and that sort of thing.
Maybe possibly bad decisions without judgment.
Yes.
Okay.
Led her to bad decisions.
Interesting. Okay. And Lance, what do you think? We kind of have an idea of how readers respond to maybe Caitlin's books and to Liska's books. What do you think people look for in the genre readers look for in books and in their characters?
Well, I've written actually two different genres, and thrillers, the reader wants excitement. They want perhaps vicarious travel to go to interesting places, meet interesting people, kill them. They want stakes. They want the story or the stakes of the story to mean something for not only the characters, but just for humanity at large, which is kind of different from the thrillers that we had back in the 50s and the 60s, where the stakes are by modern standards fairly low, and they mostly involve the people who were actually involved in the story. And so the body counts tended to be pretty low. There was not a whole lot of on-screen violence, and certainly not in the scale that we have now. And I think it's just built over time as thrillers have had to compete with the real world. And so Eric Ambler could write a thriller that was well received back in the early 60s, and maybe 2 people died, and the stakes of the story were just involving the half dozen of people who were major characters in the book, which seems pretty small beer these days when you look at the kinds of stories that we see every day on the television or reading, online or in newspapers. And so now we have to save all of humanity. We have to save the planet. We have to, stop ultimate evil from taking over the universe and so forth. And so I think that's the thrillers. But now that I'm in mystery and capers, we're going from Armageddon to hijinks, kind of. So the kinds of things that Matt deals with aren't going to bring down empires. They're not going to save the human race or anything like that. But for the people who are involved, they are important. So at that point, I think the readers are connecting with the characters and want to see what the characters are doing and not necessarily counting on there being a lot of violence, a lot of battles, a lot of that kind of thing. In a way, that makes it harder to write because I think it was Raymond Chandler who said if you ever get stuck on a plot and you have a guy come through a door with a gun, which you can do in a thriller, but you can't necessarily in a caper because that's not the kind of story it is. So now I have to try to figure out how to do tension and drama in doing things that aren't inherently tense and dramatic. So a lot of it is, can Matt pull this off? And, Matt do this scam and make it work. So in Chasing Clay, one of the sequences that's in that is that he has to renovate a house in a week in order to pretend to be this really wealthy collector. And so it's, can he do it? Can he find the house? Can he get it fixed? Can he make it work it right? Can he keep the people who he's trying to con from figuring out who he really is? And does all of that stuff work? Which is a whole different kind of tension. And it's more I'm doing The Sting than I'm doing, James Bond. So I think that's the essential difference between the two genres that I've been working in. And I've noticed that going back now writing the Carson story, and Carson is basically an action heroine, that it's actually easier to write her story because we're back to have a guy come through the door with a gun. And that automatically injects a lot of tension, where before she kind of had to behave herself. And it was Matt who was having to deal with what was going on. And so that was the non-kinetic, low-impact type story.
Interesting. Okay, so you have readers who are looking for deep story, and you have flexibility as a fiction writer to create these kinds of circumstances that are going to fit your plots and the characters. Right. So moving on to Caitlin. So how do you deal with nonfiction? How do you make these nonfiction true crime situations that you deal with that you're trying to be objective? How do you make them so readable?
Well, my goal I'm here to tell a story, but I'm here to tell you the story that you think you already know, but that you don't know. And I'm going to show you all the things that you didn't know. And that's what research is all about. And I am a very, very deep researcher. So, I was an investigative reporter at newspapers for 19 years before I quit to write books full time. I'm now working on my 14th and 15th book, and I'm still getting better, and I'm still going deeper and learning new things. I just wanted to quickly, I didn't want to ramble on too many books at the beginning, but this one here that we worked on for 2 years, it's Hunting Charles Manson, was very difficult because everybody said, oh, well, the authoritative version of that case is Helter Skelter. Well, it came out in 1974. There's a lot of information that wasn't available in 1974. The book that I'm working on right now, the Rebecca Zahau case, that information has only been out in dribs and drabs, and nobody really knows the real story. And they're counting on me to expose this big conspiracy. I have people coming up to me in Home Depot and saying, you have to prove, who paid off the sheriff and, this and that. And so it's I basically have to go in and look for the truth. And I try to dribble out new information, sometimes hopefully opening the book with brand new information that people don't have, so that they're caught immediately up with the story. And then, wow, she really knows what she's talking about. But I'm basically putting in new information all the way through. And so, with a case like anyone that I pick, somebody's dead. Usually with a true crime story, you pick someone who has been murdered and a killer has been convicted, because that's the way those books are written, and that's how you get a book deal. You have to have a court ruling or a conviction of some sort. And what's different about the one I'm working on right now is there was no criminal conviction. There was only a civil finding in a jury verdict, but a civil finding, and that's a much lower standard. So it's telling a story, it's doing a lot of research, and it's interviewing people. So each book is different, but my goal is to show people, as I can get as close as I possibly can to the truth, but I still have to follow a story arc, and it's still written like a thriller. So that is the trick, it's absolutely, completely 100% true. I don't make up anything. I don't assume anything. I don't embellish or exaggerate. But I am still writing suspense. I'm raising questions and showing you a side of something, and based on how people act. And it's all written in scenes, so you have people interacting, and the reader's learning about the characters. The reader is learning about motivation of why people did what they did. You can see how good the investigation was or how bad the investigation was. You can see how the attorneys are scheming and dealing. And I mean, they're still all characters. I still have to write them just like you guys do. It just all has to be true.
Yeah. So let's talk about hunting Charles Manson.
Okay.
So you mentioned that a lot of people feel, even David Duchovny probably feels like he knows a lot of Charles Manson. Anybody ever, what was that, Aquarius? What was the TV show he did?
Yeah, Aquarius.
Yeah, short-lived. So how did that book deal come about? How is there still interest in that today? And what new angle did you inject or interject in that to make that marketable?
Well, I'm a co-author, and I was hired to work on that with Lise Wheel. Lise, yeah. So,
do people know who she is? Do you want to talk about who she is?
She was, at the time that we started the book, she was on Fox News, and she was featured on Bill O'Reilly's show. But then partway through our book, she sued Bill O'Reilly and for the largest sexual harassment settlement ever. So anyway, a couple of years.
What book deal?
So anyway, but we don't talk about that.
Okay. That's just us here. Yeah.
I'm just saying that's what happened. Everyone knows that happened. So the key, though, was to try to find new information to advance the story. And it was very difficult because none of the police agencies would cooperate. Managed to find, thankfully, at least partial trial transcripts with the DA's office in LA. I worked in the basement of the Superior Court archives, going through these really, really old original files, which, like, somebody had dumped the box upside down and threw all the papers up, and they stuck them back in the box. They were so disorganized. But, it was fascinating. And there's actually a lot of information that we managed to get out of the parole hearing transcripts, which have been going on and they're still going on, and people are still bringing out new information that was not available before, because number one, they didn't testify, they were brainwashed. Number two, they were scared of Manson. Number three, they want to get out of prison, and so they're willing to say more of what actually happened now than they did before. And so their stories weren't in Helter Skelter. So, that book has actually quite a bit of new information in it, but it just, there's so many books on Charles Manson that it's hard to stand out in the marketplace. But like I said, I didn't choose that, it chose me. I was hired to work on that, so.
Okay. Okay. So your stories, sometimes you choose, and then sometimes people choose you.
Yes.
Okay. So
Mostly I like to choose my own books and choose the cases that I want to write about, but those cases sometimes choose me too, even if it's just me.
well, you're all over, right? You do TV you're on, was it IDTV and
A lot of investigation discovery. Yeah. I was just on 2020, that was great. And I got some really bizarre hate mail and stuff on Facebook because just being attacked for writing about or even mentioning the word she for Skylar DeLeon. I was called the most horrible names that I've ever been called. It was just crazy.
Okay. So, all right. So you as an author, I guess that is an interesting topic too. When you put yourself out, your stories out there, you're also putting yourself out there to the public for evaluation and judgment and comment.
Yep.
So Liska, talk a little bit about, I know we mentioned that before, about, I mean, I read some of your reviews, the reviews on Amazon, and it was interesting because occasionally most of the reviews are, we love this, it's interesting, whatever. And then occasionally you'll get that one review that, that person didn't find Elsa or particularly engaging. So how do you deal with that as a creator?
I think at this point, because this is the second book, I've learned that to love the 5-star reviews and the 1-star reviews. The in between, I feel like I failed, sort of, because it doesn't feel like I've touched a nerve. If it's a 1-star, it's almost always like virile hate for Scylla, which means I've touched something there that reader. They didn't stop reading the book. They finished reading the book, and then they were so angry that they went online and posted a review. And that interests me because I've challenged them in a way, and it stuck with them. It's not my favorite type of review. Of course, I like the 5-star reviews better, where people, I feel like, oh, we've made a connection. I think my favorite reactions so far have been, I think I've told you this, but there's a train scene, and talk about suspense. I think one of the things with my books that's suspenseful, especially The Worst Kind of Want, is just sex. Half the book is will she or won't she cross that line with Donato. And there's a train scene in it that's the middle of the book where it's the longest part of the longest scene in the whole book, because I'm dragging out whether or not she's going to cross that line. And I had a pregnant friend who had gotten the book and was texting me back and forth about different scenes in the book. And oh my God, I'm at this part. And oh my God, I'm at this part. And I know when I'm really going to get a text message from somebody that I know. So I love these kinds of text messages. And because there's a lot of oh my God parts. Wow, Liska, you really went there. And yes, I did. But so at the train scene, all of a sudden I knew it was coming up, and she just stopped texting me. And I thought, I guess I've really, I guess maybe I did go too far, or, maybe you just lost interest, or, and then about 3 or 4 days went by, and I texted her and I said, okay, what happened? Like, did you just lose interest? Did I disgust you? Like, are we still friends? It is fiction. And she said, no, I was reading the train scene and I got to the end and then I went into labor. And I was like, that when the book comes out in paperback, I want that as like a blurb.
Labor inducing.
Yes, yeah. So those are the kinds of responses that I like. That's a physical response, right? But
I would say
definitely, if you had a baby. So those are kinds of I get a wide range, but it tends to be very strong reactions. Either they love it or they hate it, but that's kind of where I want to be. I also
Were you prepared for that? Or
yes and no. I mean, I think as a writer, you pour so much of yourself into it. You think, if I did this right, and I fool myself this every single time, and then I have to remind myself after the book comes out. But as a writer, I think you think, if I just get all the words right, I will make universally everyone understand what it is I'm trying to say. Universally, I will connect with everyone and they will all see what I'm trying to do. And then of course the first couple bad reviews come out and you're like, oh, I failed. And then you kind of feel really bad about yourself. And then you're like, wait, no, that's not how this works at all. once you have a book that goes out into the world, it becomes its own sort of person, and people feel ownership over it, and they're allowed to have interactions and emotions with it that are not connected to you. But I think as a writer, it's hard to get past that.
Yeah, it's a very personal.
Yeah, I'm still learning. As I write the third book, I'm telling myself, don't you're going to go through this the same emotional roller coaster every single time.
So, okay, let's talk about that. Why don't you talk about the book you're working on now?
So same, this is so funny. But I am writing a third book right now that takes place at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And like Caitlin, I do a lot of research. I'm a very firm researcher.
That's a very good excuse for hanging out at the Beverly Hills Hotel, Liska.
Well, tell me about it. The second book took place in Italy, so I had to go there like 5 times. The first time I went was in the fall, and then I realized it was going to be a summer book, and I was like, well, now I have to know what it's like in the summer. So I'm a dedicated researcher, just like you. So I did go to the Beverly Hills Hotel. It takes place there. I was inspired by a story that may or may not be true, and this is where I think fiction and nonfiction sort of cross over. Is I tend to be inspired by little kernels of truth that sort of fall in my lap, where I think about, and then I build on top of that. And then later I worry about whether or not I can get sued. But the story I heard was during the LA riots, the ones in the 90s, all the wealthy people in Beverly Hills were scared it was turning into sort of a French Revolution style situation. And so no one felt safe in their mansions. So they congregated at the Polo Lounge for several nights. And that fascinates me. So not that I'm writing a book that takes place during the LA riots, but I love the idea of people. I just love a good house mystery anyways, where people are stuck in a situation like a boat sailing to Catalina or Puglia. They're all stuck in a hotel there too. So I'm writing a book that takes place in a hotel, but during sort of a chaotic time. It's not a pandemic. I started with fires and then this happened. So I've been considering whether or not I should just throw in a pandemic also, just to make it relevant.
That's the gift. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's going to be fun and racy. I keep looking up because I have a mood board above my computer, so that's where the whole world is right above you guys that I'm creating.
That's good. Right above us in the Museo. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Lance, what are you working on right now?
Well, like I mentioned, Carson is getting her own story. If you haven't read any of the DeWitt books, which probably most of you haven't, Carson is a disgraced ex-Toronto detective who also works for the DeWitt agency, and she is assigned to be Matt's babysitter on his first project. And she is tough talking. She has a mouth on her. She's got an attitude, and she is also very physically fit and capable. And so when there's heads that need to be busted, she does it. And there's a whole backstory for why. So anyway, after being in 2 of the DeWitt books, she is now going to be the lead character in the first of the DeWitt agency adventures. And it's based on a real story. Back several years ago, a couple of paintings were stolen out of a Dutch museum, and they went missing for several years, and they ended up in the hands of a militia in the Donbass, which is the breakaway part of the Ukraine. And the museum had to go ransom them and get them back. So I, of course, thought, well, what would have happened if that deal went wrong? And in this case, the deal goes wrong, and it's Carson who is helping the museum get the paintings back, and everything just blows up. And so she is stuck in the Donbass in the middle of a revolution, basically, trying to get these 2 things back and not get killed. So she gets to be front and center in this. It'll be interesting. Whenever somebody actually has read my books, and I say, well, what do you like about them? I say, oh, I love Carson. Carson's great. So now we'll see if you can take 350 pages of Carson and still love her at the end of it. And if not, then well, I know that there won't be another one, and if so, then we'll see how that goes. So anyway, it's called Zrada, which is the Ukrainian word for betrayal, because there's a lot of that going on. I'm about 2/3 the way through it at this point.
Okay, great. Well, we are looking forward to that. So,
very good.
yeah.
I hope you and several million other people will be looking forward to that.
I mean, I love a strong woman story anytime. So that's ticked all the boxes.
Excellent.
And it has art in it too.
And it has art in it. Yeah.
It has art in it. The art is the MacGuffin. It's not a Matt story where you really get up close and personal with the art. The art is a MacGuffin, but still, she's chasing a couple of paintings around eastern Ukraine.
Okay.
There's a lot of Russian names too, so if you're into that, you're full in.
So, are you doing research? Are you going to the Ukraine?
No.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely not.
They've got some good airfares there now. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there are. It's the life insurance that you have to pay for when you go there. That's the problem. It's also set 2 years ago, back when things were considerably hotter on the ground back then. So I've missed, unfortunately, a lot of the really fun action. So I just have to imagine it.
Well, Lance also has an intelligence background. So yeah, and art. So he has a unique perspective on his books, or in his books. Okay, Caitlin, what are you working on now? Well, you talked a little bit about
Yeah, so I'm working on
multiple projects, right?
Yeah, I've got 2 books actually, which I usually have a bunch of planes on the runway books. They're all in different stages because you can't. Sometimes these cases, if they're death penalty cases, they can take, 8, 9, 10 years to get to trial. So I always have to be working on a number of different books, but I'm working on something really different as well. And I started working on that, then I took a break in order to do the Rebecca Zahow book, but I want to talk about that one first. And that is, it doesn't have a title yet, but it's about the San Diego Zoo's Frozen Zoo. So has nothing to do with crime. It's about saving the planet, which I thought was a really nice break from all the church.
Yeah.
It's basically about, what we've done to the planet, and a lot of these animals are rare or extinct or almost extinct. There is a group of these researchers who have basically taken living tissues and cells and frozen them, and they're in a bank, essentially, in these giant tanks of liquid nitrogen. They're frozen, and so it's really fascinating to me. It's like a real Jurassic Park, but it's not. Jurassic Park is not real. That's made up science.
It's not.
It's actually not. They came to the Frozen Zoo researching that movie, and got ideas from the real thing, but it was basically started by a guy named Dr. Benershka, who is the father of the football player Ralph Benershka, and he was this scientist, and he was researching, and he started this a long time ago privately, and then brought it over and made it part of, it became part of the San Diego Zoo. So anyway, it's a book about the Frozen Zoo and the history of it, and how does it work, and who are the people who are working on it, and how do they pick the animals and what animals, and
is it like the seed bank?
It also has seeds, yeah. So it has living tissue, it has fertilized, I don't know the scientific names, I forget, gametes, zygotes, all those different things where they can literally breed. So they're working on taking the northern white rhino or the southern white rhino, I can't remember which one. There's only like 2 left on the whole planet, and so they're going to try to take these cells that they have, or and fertilize it with another similar species, and put it into a surrogate, and make a new animal, essentially bringing back this by using this anyway. It's really fascinating. And the Rebecca Zahow case, the book has a name. It's called She Saved Him, Can You Save Her? And that was the message that was painted on the door of the bedroom where she was. There was a red rope attached to this bed, and then it went over the balcony, and she was found supposedly hanging from this rope. And so that was the message on the door. And to this day, nobody can prove, did she write it or did the killer, if she was killed, did the killer write it? And what, so that's the title of the book, The Mysterious Death of Rebecca Zahow. And I've been working on it since July 13th, 2011, which was the day that the 911 call came into the Coronado Police Department. The brother of her boyfriend called in 911. I got a girl in the guest house. So anyway, yeah, it's it's a book that's haunted me. And I tried not to do it. I kind of fought it because it's if there really is a killer out there, they could come after me. And if there isn't a killer out there, and these people are being accused, they could sue me. So it's like, either way, it's been a pretty risky kind of a story. But I just was compelled and obsessed with this case, and I couldn't not do it. I just tried and I couldn't not do it. I've never really had that with a book before.
Wow. So are you contracted for that book? Is that on spec?
Absolutely, yeah, it's due in 2 weeks. So I'm actually doing this today because I thought it would help me have a day to just give my brain a break, because I work on it every day until I can't see anymore. I'm sitting at the computer until I literally can't see anymore. So
that's crazy. Well, we're looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Okay, so where are we now? How are we on time? Good. Carol, what before?
So fascinating. I do have a question from Barbara.
Okay, before we get to Barb's question, real quickly, can everybody tell us where their books can be found and purchased and bought? Liska, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll hold up the covers again because they're just so
They're
pretty.
beautiful.
I think bookshop.org is a good place for people to be buying books right now. A percentage of it will go to help your local independent bookstore, and their shipping, which is great. I think Amazon has paused all their shipping on their books, so I would do that.
Okay, great. And if you have a local bookstore, most local bookstores are taking phone orders and can still order books, and a lot of them are doing free shipping. So yeah, that's a good place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Always support your independent. I used to work at a bookstore, so support the indies for sure.
Okay. All right, Lance.
Okay, Doha 12 and these two are available on pretty much anything, pretty much everywhere. So depending on what e-reader you use, or if you like paper books, you can get them pretty much any place. Chasing Clay and South, which I forgot to bring over from my bookshelf, are on Kindle Unlimited. So if you've got a Kindle and you're paying your monthly fee, you can read this for no additional money. If you like paper books, this is also available pretty much anywhere you can buy a paper book online. None of my books are available in stores, although you can walk into a Barnes & Noble. Well, you could until they were all closed, but you can walk into a Barnes & Noble and order it. Yes, and they will send it to you. So.
Okay, great. And Caitlin, I know we were talking about your books.
Yeah, a number of my books have gone out of print. Twisted Triangle, I was actually ready to reissue it and update it, and Margot didn't want to do that because her husband got out of prison, and so that got on hold, unfortunately. So that is actually not available. I do have a few copies if anyone's interested in a collector's item, but most of them are
Patricia Cornwall.
Yeah, most of them are available though still as ebooks. The rest of them are all available as ebooks. I have copies of paper books. I have a book closet with books that are out of print if anybody's interested in a signed copy, or just a paperback copy, that because you're not going to be able to get it in a bookstore. Yeah, Amazon is pretty much not restocking. I think they're selling until they're out of a title, and then they're not selling it anymore, and they're not restocking, and they're also making you wait. So I totally agree with Liska. Do bookshop.org. That's new. It's really helping out.
Indie.org, isn't that the other one?
And the indie.org is another one, but the bookshop, I think, is a newer one, and they have different rates, maybe, I don't know, but
yeah, well,
your local indie bookstore that you like in San Diego, where there's Book Catapult, which is one of my favorites. So
yeah. I was just going to add with the bookshop.org thing. I think what's cool is publishers can create their own bookstores on there. And then also a lot of bookstores, like your local bookstore, might create so Romans, I think, has created a bookstore on there. And then they get percentages of it. So.
Great. Okay. All right, great. Okay, Carol, I think this is a good time to turn it over to our hostess. Yeah.
Well, thank you so very much. This has been so enlightening. And I think we will also have some of the links to your websites on the Museo link website as well. Barbara does have a question, and she wanted to know when you knew you were a writer, and how did you pick the area of telling your stories as opposed to writing in a different one?
It's a good question.
Who wants to go first?
Anybody?
I'll go. I'll start. I started writing stories when I was a little girl. I would just sit there and make up stories and write them, and some of them were just really not probably very good. But I read a lot of books because I was an only child, and so that's all I ever did was, have stories in my head, and I would talk to myself as the characters, and I just had these voices, I guess, in my head. And actually the first book that I wrote was a novel, and I do have one crime novel. All my other books are nonfiction, either memoir or true crime, or a combination of both. But I do have one novel. It's called Naked Addiction. It was my first book that I ever wrote. It took me 17 years to get published. And it takes place in San Diego at the beach, murder, sex, drugs, and, that kind of good stuff.
Yes.
But I basically just, I went on to become a journalist and wrote, nonfiction in the newspaper, learned how to do narrative, which is, in scenes. The writing coach and I learned how to do that. So I started writing narrative in the newspaper. And so I was bringing the fiction techniques with the true stories and then combined them with narrative nonfiction. That's what it is. So my books are true stories that read like novels. But the crime stuff kind of came later. I was always an investigative reporter writing about politics and government and incompetence and, bad people who were liars. And, I got tired of covering politics and government. So I switched over to writing about crime because it just seemed less dirty. So.
Oh, if that is not a scathing commentary, I don't know what is.
Especially right now. Oh, God.
I was like you. I started writing very young too. I think that was something I was always drawn to. I used to type little horror stories on a typewriter when I was little. What got me writing to what I'm publishing now is really, I think I had read a lot when I was younger, but I never really connected with any authors until I was getting my English degree at UCLA. And that was when I found Jean Reese, and also Margaret Duras. I am a huge fan of her work too. And that was the first time where I thought, oh, my voice has a place in the publishing world. There are books like, these are the books that I like to read, and these are the books that I like to write. And then I went after, I just threw caution to the wind, quit my full-time job, and went after an MFA. And when I entered that program, Catalina was a novella. It was probably about 40 pages. And I thought, maybe it'll just be a short novella or something. But during the program, I built it out with my professors, Mark Axel-Smith and also Todd Goldberg, and really learned narrative also while I was in the program with them. And while writing narrative nonfiction, I was writing a lot of nonfiction with David Hewlin. And between all of that and all the reading I was doing, I was able to sort of build Catalina into a novel. And I learned a lot about writing novels in that program, and then was lucky enough to get an agent and publish it.
Okay. Well, the first thing I remember writing was Adam 12 fan fiction when I was in 4th grade, which should tell you how old I am, first of all. And like Caitlin, I was an only, and so I read a lot. And back when I was a kid, there was really no such thing as YA. And so I graduated from Encyclopedia Brown to, Alistair MacLean and John D. MacDonald in one step. And those were the books I had around because that's what my parents read. And so I started reading a lot of crime fiction and spy books and so on and so forth. And I've always written the kinds of stories that I want to read, and that tends to be in a few genres that kind of cluster around mystery and thriller. And so I just continued with that. The Doha 12, which is the first book I actually published, was like the 7th full-length novel that I had written. I had enough sense not to publish the first 6 ones, and this one was the first one that wouldn't be, absolutely disastrous to put out in public. And I just kind of carried on from there. I started writing the DeWitt books because everybody was telling me, well, you have to have a series. You have to have a series. That's the only way you can make money is to have a series. And I said, I don't like series. Because eventually the author starts writing the same thing over and over and over again. I don't want to do that. And so finally I thought, okay, fine, I'll do that. And I was heavily into reading about crimes against art at the time. And I thought, there's enough variation in this. There's enough kinds of stories I could tell that it'll probably take me a few books before I start repeating myself, and I have to kill all the characters so I don't keep doing it.
As long as you don't kill the animals.
Hey, what was that?
As long as you don't kill cats or dogs.
Yeah, no cats or dogs. Just people. It's fine to kill people. That's fine. But we don't want to kill any cats or dogs. Right. And so that's how I got where I am now.
Okay. I was just wondering, through the presentation, you've all talked about some of the authors that you enjoy. Who are some of your favorites? Let's start with you. I'll go back to you, Lance. Who are some of your favorite authors?
Oh boy, it's kind of all over the place. John le Carré, Len Deighton to a somewhat lesser extent. I read a little of a lot of different things. Robert Cray, the first few Elvis Cole novels were really good. I like that. Simon Burdett with the Thailand set detective novels. Christopher Brookmeyer is Tartan Noir, extremely attitudinal, excessive everything in them, and they're a riot to read. And then just kind of on and so forth on either side of that. And I've been reading a lot of nonfiction about financial crime and art crime and so forth because it's research. So.
Okay, thank you. How about you, Liska?
I'm looking at my library to try to pull my favorites. I would say, well, besides Jean Rhys and Marguerite Duras, I'm a huge Elena Ferrante fan, but I'm not so much the Neapolitan novels. I know everyone loves them and they're great, but I love Days of Abandonment. I think that's such a fabulous book, and sort of her other novels, I think, are really wonderful and should be read. I love Deborah Levy also. She's a fantastic writer. She's a British writer. Swimming Home is a great novel. She just published another book that was up for the Man Booker called The Man Who Saw Everything, which is really good. And then also I like Paul Bowles, The Sheltering Sky. If you haven't read that, that's a fabulous book. And I think, of course, for nonfiction, Joan Didion. I'm a Joan Didion fan, of course. I also think novelists should be reading a lot of poetry. I think it's a good thing to have some poets that you like to read. I love Claudia Rankine and also Carol Ann Duffy. Their poetry I keep with me. I have the way I set up my library is basically an entire mess of books stacked on top of each other, and then one bookshelf of books that I really like and I refer to all the time. So that they're up there with them.
Well, it's interesting that you added poetry because April being National Poetry Month, yes. It's a great time to get into that genre of.
Yeah, and I think I've been reading a lot more poetry during this pandemic. I think part of it is it's hard to focus. I don't know if anyone else is having trouble with that, but it's been hard for me to focus on work and reading. So poetry has been really a balm for me because they're short. You can reflect on it. It's more meditative. Beckett, I've been reading more Beckett lately also.
Well, you know, right now, the inaugural poet laureate for the city of Anaheim, Grant Heyer, he's been publishing, I think, almost daily, a poem. And I think you can find that on his Facebook page. But it gives such soul and
it really does.
And passion and
Yeah.
and compassion to the whole situation that we're in. So Caitlin, some of your favorite authors.
Well, when I was trying to get published, I was learning how to write a book. I didn't want anything more in my life than to publish a book. I was obsessed before I got published originally. I can't tell you, I wanted it so much that it kept me going for 15 years until I finally did it. A lot of people give up before that. So I was reading to learn how to write a book. You know, what did I think that I could write? Where was my interest? What did I like to read? And so I read a lot of Michael Connelly. And at the time I was reading a lot of Patricia Cornwell, and that was early Patricia Cornwell. I did not like Patricia Cornwell once she got into the, you know, characters, you know, as a dog. She had a cat or a dog or something in one of her books, and I'm like, is she on drugs or something? And I found that her crimes and her character, she was torturing people, and I was just like, I can't read this anymore. I don't want to read horrible, violent books. I don't want to watch violent movies. I don't want to watch violent movies. I don't want to read violent books. And that's funny. I think that people wouldn't expect a true crime author to say something like that because I'm writing about murder, but I'm actually not really writing about murder. I'm writing about why people commit murder and what makes them into murder. So I'm more interested in the psychology of it. I read a lot of thrillers for pacing purposes and to learn how to do suspense techniques. So I read quite a few medical thrillers, Michael Crichton and I can't remember some of the other people. And then I read Sandra Brown. I mean, I read a lot of people who were successful. May not have been my books of choice to read, but I wanted to learn how they got so successful. I also read a lot of literary fiction by women. I loved Anne Patchett. I used to read a lot of the Anns. There were a whole lot of Anns, Ann Tyler, Ann Beatty, and you know, there were a lot of the Anns. And Ethan Kanan, I thought was really amazing. And I went to one of his book signings once. I was so excited to meet him. And other than that, I do so much reading for research. And right now, all I do all day long when I'm not working on my book is read about the coronavirus and the latest studies. I mean, my brain is like a computer and I just absorb information. So I'm actually reading more information than I am reading poetry and stories and fiction. And maybe I should be reading more. And as soon as I finish this book, I think I'll be able to take a break and go back to doing something that's maybe better for me. But yeah, it's hard to focus. Because I'm reading so many news stories, I feel like I need to know how to protect myself and people who I care about. And so that right now is my obsession. So maybe when I finish this and can switch gears, I can go read some of the books that are sitting in my pile that I David's book, etc.
But I think we have time for just one more quick question. And this is, what's the most surprising thing you learned while creating your latest book?
Ooh. Surprising.
Who wants to go first?
I'm always surprised. I'm surprised with the one I'm writing right now that every time I do another interview, I'll change my mind about what I think about the premise of the book, which is going to make the book better because it'll be like this, like it'll be like a tennis match, right? So that's a quick answer.
How about you, Lance?
Well, the one that I'm writing right now, I had been aware of the Donbass revolution ever since it started, thinking it would be a good setting. But as I got into it and was looking at the dynamics of it, it's just how much of it has been subsumed by Russia, and that the people who started the uprising in 2014, or a lot of them have been sidelined now, and a lot of it is being run by Russian agents and the Russian army as opposed to the locals, and that there's not universal support for that kind of level of involvement for Russia, even by the people who had started the rebellion. So that was kind of surprising to me.
And Liska?
I think it's a really good question. I write about want. I think I've realized that's sort of what I'm interested in about this human desire for want. And what, Caitlin, what you're saying about your desire to publish, I had that also. In fact, one night when I wanted to publish Catalina, I thought about it being the worst kind of want, which is how the title came about for the second novel. Just the idea of wanting something so bad that it borders on need. And so when I was working on the worst kind of want, and it was at first just called Donato, I thought it would be a book about a woman desire. I thought it was going to be about female desire and what you can and cannot have. What surprised me about the book was that it became more about grief and more about the human connection that we want with our siblings and with our family. And that surprised me. I think when I got to the ending and I got to the last line of the book, I was in tears because I did not realize that was the direction the book was going to go. So that really surprised me. I thought I was writing like sort of a racy, in your face, I'm switched, Lolita, haha, feminism. And then I realized I just wrote a book about longing, which surprised me.
Any last comment from you?
Yeah, can I add some
before
things?
we do the close on that?
Yeah, can I add something? Because I did answer for listening to you guys answer your questions. I wanted to just add something. The book that I'm working on, which I can't really obviously talk about because it's not out yet, but writing, it's like this whole process. I've been covering this case since 2011, and the evolution of what the premise of the book was going to be has changed the more that I've learned. And so, like I said, I have changed my mind quite a bit. Every time I find out something new, I'll get a new viewpoint. And so it's been really eye-opening to me, and I want to take the reader on that ride with me. So that's kind of, how I craft these books is kind of my learning curve. And so I'll save the things that made me see this suddenly, for the ending. And the ending of this book keeps changing as I'm writing it. And that's what's been pretty surprising to me, that, and it'll be surprising, I think, to the people who read it, because it's new information to me and to everyone else. And so that's my joy. My joy is to try to recreate the surprise and the discovery of the process of the research and of how I see the way. I'm constantly reevaluating and reassessing everything and what it all means and what is the message I'm going to leave the reader with at the end. If there's, like I always say, I used to teach classes and I just haven't had time anymore, but here's what the story is in a very direct way. And then what is the story really about? And that's the message that that you're going to leave with the reader. What do you want people to walk away with? And so those are the things that have changed, as I'm putting the story together, and I'm still trying to figure out what that is. I'm 2 weeks away from deadline, and I'm it's hard because I've gotten a whole lot of really last minute great information that I didn't have before. So, but it's a great big responsibility, and I have to figure out, am I ending this right? Do I have the right tone? Do I have the right message? And so I'm still kind of processing all that.
Well, aren't you glad you had this little reprieve from writing so that you can be
this time
re-energized?
to share with each other. I am actually.
We could have all been at the LA Book Fair today. If we couldn't be at the LA Book Fair, I think this is a very good alternative.
Yes.
Everything. And, I think I speak for everybody, but to everybody who's on the call, that we appreciate your support and your interest. It's a hard time being a writer right now. It's a hard time promoting your books. It's a hard time connecting with readers.
with humans. It's a hard time just to connect with human beings.
Right.
Yes.
It's a hard time for readers who may be in financial straits, to get the books that they want to read. So we understand that. So we appreciate everybody's interest and support for programs like this. So when times are better, we can all get together in person and support each other in person. So in the meantime, I want to thank you, Carol, for letting us get together virtually, because this has been
Thank you
great.
so
Thank
much.
you.
I want to remind you also that on the website, your links will be on the Muzeo website for anyone who wants more information or wants to purchase books. And there'll be a follow-up email as well for our viewers to let us know your thoughts on the program. We want to continue to bring relevant programs to the community, especially during these uncertain times. And of course, if you are so disposed, there's a donation button on the website for the Museo, on our Facebook and Instagram as well. And we appreciate any of your generosity. I'd like to thank you, Maddie, Caitlin, Liska, Lance, for this enlightening presentation this afternoon. And a
Thank you.
special thank you to those of you in our viewing audience for tuning in this afternoon. We, on behalf of the Museo, would like to wish you to stay safe, to stay well, and to stay healthy. See you again next time.
Carol,
Ah.
Carol, is there going to be a recording of this